Welcome to WRM, Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, the Edward Jones, a certified life coach who specializes in work relationships. My motto, work relationships work for those who work on them. My guest is Gloria B. Jones. She's an actress, artist, author, educator, and storyteller. She's here today to share her insights and experiences that will be beneficial to you. Welcome, Gloria,
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
and we're glad to have you. Now, you have a lot of things, a lot of talents. You've done many, many things well, but before we talk about what you do, we want to learn a little bit more about who you are. So I always talk about the backstory, how you grew up, influences in your life, things that helped shape your life from early on to today. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am the second of two children. My parents were John and Gloria Banks, and I was born in West Virginia, raised partially in Virginia and partially in Ohio. And I graduated from the University of Cincinnati, and my interests are very varied.
Now, what occupations did your parents hold?
My parents were both teachers. My father taught math and science. Um, my mother taught speech and drama. She taught French and English.
Okay. So, what do you think? What of all the things that you do, what do you consider to be your primary career?
My primary career has changed through the years. My life has gone in phases. Um, I was a teacher for, I guess, about 20 years, part of that as an aide. And so that was definitely a primary career at that time when my kids were growing up. And since then, I've done different things. Sometimes my artwork, sometimes right now my writing. So I guess as far as a money making career, teaching was my primary career when I was younger.
Now, did you feel, now you mentioned before that both of your parents were teachers, and so I wonder, was that an influence in getting you into becoming an educator?
Yes, it was a strong influence, as a matter of fact, because it was the one thing I knew quite a bit about. And when it came time for me to get a job to help out with the family, that seemed like a no-brainer to me because it was an arena in which I was pretty comfortable and I knew what to expect. So I went back to school, got my teaching degree, and started teaching.
So you mentioned you did that for 20 years. Are you still doing any educating at this point?
Well, the only educating I'm doing right now is very special little student. I'm working with my granddaughter. And when COVID came in, I took on the responsibility of homeschooling her. And it turned out to be one of the nicest teaching experiences that I've ever had. She's a quick learner and an absolute joy to be around.
Well, that is wonderful. I think that's just great. So, do you consider teaching your calling?
I don't think so for now. At one time, when it was the appropriate time to teach, I did have to consider it a calling in order to get through all the things I had to do to prepare to take it on. So I think the idea of someone's calling can sometimes be a mindset. And at that time, it was my mindset and had to be.
Well, that's great. And knowing, and folks, for full disclosure, this beautiful woman is my wife. So she works with our granddaughter, and our granddaughter just loves the exchange. And it's really been a good experience for everybody. Even in COVID, we're able to spend a lot more time together. So education was something that you did. It may not have been your calling, but you're obviously good at it. But you've got four other areas that we talked about before, where you're an author, an actress, an artist, and a storyteller. So, of all those things that you do, and you do them all very, very well, which one do you think you spend the most time on, or does that vary?
Again, I think my life is goes in phases. There are times when I spend a lot of time. For example, I love sewing. And for many years, I did a lot of sewing. That was the thing I did most. Um, and then there are some years where I do a lot of painting or drawing. And lately, I'm doing more writing. So I really would have to say that each one in its time is what I find myself doing. And I don't know, it's not something that I can control. It just seems to be an interest that comes over me and I go for it at the time.
So, what are you concentrating on now?
Right now, I'm doing a lot of writing. I have written two books. One is called Procrastination, Managing My Procrastination No Matter What's on My Plate. And that's because I was such a huge procrastinator. When the children were little, I used to joke and say, oh, goodness, we need to do this or we need to do that. And I procrastinate so much, I could write a book about this. Well, finally, after I retired, I did write a book about it. And that's on Amazon. But the latest book that I've written is called The Jacket, which is a fantasy. And in the process of uploading that to Amazon now. It's the first of a series. So right now, the writing is my primary interest, and I'm enjoying it immensely.
Now, let's talk about your first book. You can get it on Amazon. Did they just look up that title and they can get it?
Yes, managing my procrastination no matter what's on my plate. And I tell the story of how I became a procrastinator, or probably closer to the point of my first memory of procrastinating when I had two green beans on my plate and I sat there at the table for an hour or more till I just refused to eat the green beans. And um, that was my first memory of just putting off something that could have been done with a few bites, and I could have gone out and played with the rest of the kids. And instead, I procrastinated.
And at the end of the day, you had to eat the green beans, probably.
At the end of the day, I had to eat them anyway, and they were cold and slimy, and the canned green beans. Yeah, not a good experience. But I included that in the book, and that's what's on the cover of the book because it's kind of a funny story. Everybody has little kids that won't eat something, and that's my memory of it.
And that's a great story, but a great metaphor for life. That just go ahead and get it done, get it out of the way. Whatever you're thinking about, it probably isn't as bad as you think
Mhm.
it is. Just get it out the way, keep it moving, and that will save you a lot of time. And whatever it is, it's not going to be cold and untasteful by the time you finally get around to it. So that's a great metaphor for life. Now, with writing, a lot of people want to be writers, but they don't know where to get started. They don't know all the things, the ins and outs of it. And you've really delved into it, have your own publishing company. So, can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a writer?
Okay. As a little girl, I always wrote stories. I would write just odd little stories and just put them away in my notebook. And I was never extremely serious about it, but I did like to write little stories. And as I grew up and I went to high school, I would write a little bit more. And then once I started my teaching career, I found myself writing even longer stories. I even wrote a play for my students. And eventually I realized I really do like this. I guess the phase for writing finally came in once I retired and moved out here to California. And I began writing plays, and it's short plays, 10-minute plays, and one or two long ones. And a lot of the 10-minute ones were performed here. And I enjoyed writing the plays because I thought, when you write stories, there's so much more description, yada, yada, that you have to do. And when you write a play, a lot of the, I don't know, I guess the atmosphere or whatever is the director's responsibility to a degree. So after I wrote a few plays, I decided to go back and try to maybe write a few more stories. But I kept writing them and then just kind of throwing them away or putting them away. And finally I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to stop procrastinating. So I took a course from a woman who is a writer. She offered a course on how to write. And she said, well, what are you going to write about? And somehow procrastination just fell out of my mouth, uninvited. I said, I'm going to write a book on procrastination. And so I did. And once I wrote that, I used Scrivener. So I did the formatting and the whole ball of wax. And once I did that and got through the whole process, I realized, yes, I do like this. And I will pick up some of those stories or some of the storytelling I had done and see if I can run with it. So that's what I guess kind of propelled me into writing and the publishing company and the whole thing. So it was a very step-by-step thing from childhood on to adulthood, just little by little, bit by bit. So in some years when I was sewing constantly, maybe I didn't write so many little stories. And in years when I was drawing or painting a lot, maybe I didn't write so many. But each thing has come to me in its turn. And so this is writing's turn, I guess.
And folks, you just heard that there are two things that I missed in the introduction: playwright and seamstress. So that's 6 talents that are there. So that's almost unfair to the rest of us that we may have only one or two. But seamstress, playwright. The one play that stands out was the one you wrote for the grade school students. Was that the first play you wrote?
Yes, that was the first play I wrote. I have always loved grammar, and I thought to myself, how can I get grammar across to these kids? What's the best way to do it? And I thought if they could think of the parts of speech as people, as particular people doing particular jobs, that maybe they would really get into it. And surprise, surprise, they did. So I wrote this play about the parts of speech being dissatisfied with their jobs, and they would have to go to a court of speech to, adjudicate or whatever, how this was to work out, who was to modify whom and why, on and on. And the kids enjoyed it. My really antsy, overactive kids usually got to play the parts of the prepositions. But for a few years, I did the play, and it was a big hit with the kids. And I think the grammar stuck with them longer than the years that we did the play.
And that's a way of combining being a playwright and education together.
Yeah.
Now, publishing, becoming a publisher, not only are you a writer, but you have a publishing company, and that's self-publishing rather than going through someone else. Now, that seems like a daunting undertaking. So tell us a little bit about being a publisher.
Well, I'll tell you why I decided to publish. I decided that I had to take stock of my talents and my temperament. And I understood that a lot of times submitting a manuscript and the constant and total rejection that you're going to get naturally from publishers would be something that could pour water on my ability to keep writing. So knowing that about myself, I decided, well, I will write my stories. and I will find people, find my niche in a sense. And if I don't find anybody, well, I won't worry about that a whole lot either, because I will have written the story I wanted to write. I will have published it, and I will move on to the next thing. So during my storytelling, now this is not the publishing, this is the storytelling that I sometimes do for organizations. There was one story in particular that everybody really had a great response to, and it was called The Jacket. So, since the response to that particular story was so positive, I decided after I had done the procrastination book that that was the one that I would write and publish. So, that's the one. We'll have to see how it goes. But as a storytell, it did very well. And so, we'll see how it goes. And I'm sure I can find people who want to hear that story and want to read that story. Whereas it might have been very hard to find a professional publisher who wanted to publish it. And I would sit around and wait and hope and hope. And at my age, I don't have a lot of time to sit around and wait and hope and hope. So I did it myself.
Was it difficult to become a publisher? So if our listeners wanted to become a publisher, are there just any quick steps that you could give them?
I would just say go online, look up as much information about it as you can, and do the paperwork and go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Now, this storytelling, is that, tell us a little bit about that, because I don't know how many people are familiar with that industry.
Well, storytelling is a big deal, and I really didn't realize it was as big of a deal as it was until I did my first storytell at a theater called Celebration Arts here in Sacramento. And the first story that I told there was The Jacket, which has always gotten a great response from people. And sitting in the audience was Ed Lewis, who is a huge person in the storytelling industry, I guess you would say. And he heard me tell the story and he asked, would I like to come to Celebration, which is a storytelling kind of a conference or occasion where people tell different stories. And I went there, and from there, I got other offers to tell stories other places. And so it kind of snowballed from there. And there are big conventions, and the storytelling is a really big deal. Now, I have not pursued it as hard as I have pursued other things. I like it and I enjoy it, but I haven't really gone out there and done as much storytelling as maybe I should. But who knows? Maybe that'll be the next the next thing I decide to do after the writing is after I've decided I've written enough.
That sounds good. Now, being on stage, not only as a storyteller, but you're also on stage as an actress. So, of all you've done numerous plays, been the lead in some plays. So, tell us about that acting career and what that taught you, or how you enjoyed that.
I did enjoy the acting. The acting was fun. It was fun for a few years. I think the one thing that people maybe not don't think about so much with acting is the amount of time you spend sitting and waiting. Um, Especially, I did do one very short independent movie, and my part was very small in that, but there was a lot of sitting and waiting and sitting and waiting until it was time to do my part. As far as the acting for community players, well, you have to go to a lot of rehearsals. And again, you're sitting and waiting till it's your turn. And you're also having to learn your lines. And while being on stage itself is fun and exciting, and sometimes when you're in the middle of a play, you can hear the audience members discuss how you look or don't look, or but you just have to ignore it and keep on going. But it's enjoyable and it's fun, and I enjoyed it for its duration. But as I have gotten older, it's more difficult to remember all those lines. And so I don't plan to be in any more plays, although from time to time I help out at Celebration Arts with their set design. If they need a help with set painting or something like that, I'm open to doing that. But if you want to be an actor or an actress, you really have to be serious about it, because your fellow thespians are extremely serious about it. And I would have to say that if acting is definitely a calling for those who pursue it heavily.
Okay. Sounds good. What was your favorite play that you were in? Or maybe wrote?
Um, I think my favorite the favorite play that I wrote that was performed was a play about a hamster. Valentino was the name of the hamster, and he got his teacher into kind of an interesting mess. And I'd have to say Valentino was my favorite play.
Okay.
I didn't really act in it. Others performed it, but I was a writer for it.
Okay, that sounds great. So that's a door that you sound like you're closing right now. So as
Mhm,
you move on to other things.
mhm. Yes,
So
it is.
now the one thing that having all these talents is a blessing, but also may have a downside. So with having all these talents, what is the downside to having all these talents?
For me, I think it has been the feeling of being a jack of all trades, master of none. Um, because my interests are so scattered, um, I have not been able to choose one thing to really become extremely proficient at. I
Mhm.
believe I've heard it said that it takes 1,000 hours to really, really become an extremely successful person at whatever endeavor you really choose. And I'm not really sure that I've given 10,000, is it 1,000, 10,000, something like that. I'm not sure I've given that amount of time to any one of my pursuits, because, my interests go here and then they go there. And so that would be, I say, the one drawback.
And that's the downside. What is the upside?
The upside is that there is just endless excitement. There's just even when things are not going well in perhaps your work career or your relationships, you can always get excited about a color or a fabric, or you can get excited about a sentence or a phrase, or you can see someone on the street and wonder who they are and what character you'd make out of them. It's a way to handle life's ups and downs that can keep you safe from serious depression or extreme unhappiness. I think and that's what it's done for me. Even in sometimes when it just seems like life is unbearable, I can always count on one of those talents to see me through.
That's great. Where do you draw inspiration?
Everywhere, absolutely everywhere. It's just like I was saying the last time. I'm inspired when I walk the dog. I look up and I see the blue of the sky against the green of the leaves, and it just lifts me up. Or I will see, like I said, somebody on the street and wonder who they are and where they're going and what story I might tell about them. Or fabric, or just, I don't know, everything has some interest for me, just about everything, and how it looks or how it smells or how it tastes or how it could be explained to others. It's kind of just an endless potpourri of curiosity, I guess.
Well, that's good. And I think that you draw it from the airport, because I know you like to go to the airports, Starbucks, you see a lot of different things there that maybe inspire you sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so you go from the mundane and find stories in those things. And I think that's part of where the creativity comes in.
Yeah. I think so. It's just everywhere.
Mhm. So if you were giving advice to a young person who is multi-talented, because you just brought up a couple of other things that you do, including photography. So that's another talent that you have, and that's one that you, well, I guess with phones you can do that. You don't have to carry a camera around with you all the time, but I know you used to do that. So you all find, I think, beauty in nature, clouds, whatever it might be. And I think photography, is that something that you're still interested in, or has that been, is that time has come and gone?
I think the photography that I might do now would be connected to if I were going to do a painting.
Mhm.
That's pretty much how I would use it. Or with photography, I enjoy, of course, taking pictures of the grandkids and the family. But I never considered that a huge interest of mine. It was just something that was fun.
Right. And now just talk briefly about your art. What is your favorite medium in art for art?
Oh, that's a tough one. I love cut paper. I did a phase where I did a lot of cut paper, beautifully colored cut papers that I would put together to create pictures. Um, I liked charcoal. I did charcoal for a while. I did your mother's portrait in charcoal, and she was very pleased with that. I would have to say right now, I like acrylics because I work a lot with stenciling. So I will draw a picture and then cut out each section, stencil it, cover it back up, cover out the next section. So that's what I'm enjoying right now. I would have to say acrylics.
Well, that's great. That's great. So, one thing, is there anything that you wanted to share, that a question I didn't ask? You said, I really want young people to know this, or multi-talented people to know this. Is there anything that we haven't covered here that you would like to cover now?
Um, I guess I would like for people to for young people when they come up against obstacles, not to think of them as stopping places. I would like for people to think of obstacles as signposts that maybe they're pointing you in a different direction, and not to be put off by them, but to examine whatever an obstacle is, examine themselves, where they want to go, and try to use an obstacle that comes up in their way as something that enriches them instead of necessarily stops them dead.
Okay. So, if our listeners want to know more about you or learn more about the different products that you provide, how would they contact you or learn more about your endeavors?
Well, I don't have a website yet. I'm working on that, but I guess they could go to Amazon. That's what I would recommend, and check out my books. The Jacket, which is being loaded now, or Managing My Procrastination, No Matter What's on Your Plate. Those would be my two books that I would send people to investigate at this point.
Is social media an option, or is it primarily Amazon?
Well, the books are on Amazon, and at this point, I don't have a really good social media presence. I need to work on that. So I do have an Instagram, and that would be Jorleah Art on Instagram.
How do you spell that?
JORLEAH.
Okay, great. Great. Okay. Well, Gloria, thank you so much for taking time out to be on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And this is WRM Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, The Edward Jones, a certified life coach who specializes in work relationships. My motto, work relationships work for those who work on them. To learn more about my coaching business, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com. That's www.prodestiny.com. Thank you for spending time with us. And we're out. Welcome to WRM, Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, The Edward Jones, a certified life coach who specializes in work relationships. My motto, work relationships work for those who work on them. My guest is Dr. Robin Carter, Dean Emeritus of the College of Health and Human Services, California State University, Sacramento. She is here to share her thoughts and insights that will be beneficial to you. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited and look forward to our talk here today.
Absolutely. You've done so many wonderful things, and looking forward to learning even more about you. Now, you're a very successful person. You've done a lot of things, especially your role as the dean. But before you get into that, I want to know what people do. But before I do that, I want to know who they are. So I want to start with your backstory. How did it all begin? Influences that helped you from the beginning all through to now. So who is Robin Carter? Where did she get started? Who are her influences?
Yes, good questions. I would say, I came into, academia, which we'll be talking most about, because, most of my professional career has been in academia, and I was there for 33 years. But before that time, I received my BA in social work and my master's degree in social work, both from Sacramento State, and worked as a social worker for a long time. So really grassroots, community-based, sometimes nonprofits, and other times governmental, county and state jobs. But really early on, as a 20-year-old, I saw myself as kind of saving the world. I wanted to be a social worker. It was something my mother always wanted to do. It was really rooted in, family legacy of helping others and being there for others, things that I saw growing up in the Baptist church in my hometown. So all of those things kind of brought together, and, it made that the perfect career choice for me. Like I could actually have a career focused on working with people and for people. And it really wasn't until I taught a course part-time, was still working full-time, and taught a course part-time at Sacramento State, replied to an ad, and it really developed a whole new career focus and direction to me. And that was my entree into higher education. So that's really the background story. Just kind of stumbled into higher ed and loved it and flourished there.
Right. Now, you mentioned that your mother was involved in helping the community. I guess what she was doing may not have been called social work officially, but that's in fact what she was doing.
Yes.
Is that what you saw? Did you work with her when she was doing different things, or how did that whole influence affect you?
Yes, and I would say not only my mother, but my extended family. And again, rooted in their in the church and their belief that the community as a whole, we have a responsibility for the whole community. That was part of the faith that I was brought in, but also it was actionable faith that they actually and my mother and father in their retirement. What they did at their churches, they headed up a feeding program. And so anybody in the community, they had a church in Merced, California. anybody in the community, they had a 5-day a week, anybody could come for any reason and get a hot meal. And I'm just going to say, the other thing that was really important part of the legacy for my family was feeding people, cooking and feeding my people. My mother on holidays, everybody showed up at my mom's house at one way or another. Everybody stopped through, just to taste and to congregate and to be around family and friends. But she would cook those meals in her kitchen. She would, her famous beans or famous spaghetti, the things that she liked. She wanted those people to have good food, the kind of good home cooked meals that she prepared for her family. She felt these people deserved them as well. It also allowed an opportunity to provide other range of services, because the people who came through many times were homeless, or they had substance abuse problems, or they had other difficulties. So it gave the opportunity for them to engage them and help them with a range and a myriad of problems as well. So this is, again, the kind of, informal community support kind of network that I grew up in my extended family.
Well, great. Now, Rob, do you cook?
Oh, I cook. Yes, I do cook. And I'm going to say I'm a good cook, but I am not my mother. Okay. And let me just tell you, anybody, including my children, will remind me that you are not Nana. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's good. That was just interesting when I heard about all she was doing and how she influenced you in that way. So maybe one day we'll taste some of your cooking. Who knows?
Yeah. And there's still time. I can still get to Nana level. I still got some years ahead of me.
Right. Yeah, and so many things that you can do now that you're in retirement that you can pick up on that you didn't have time for before.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, are you from California? My family is from Mississippi and Tennessee, and that y'all come and have the big dinner was a part of the thing that we had in the South and the Midwest. Are you from California, or do your roots go further back?
No, I am a native Californian. I was born in Merced, California. Went to Atwater High. Lived in a really small town called Winton, right next to Merced. So I'm Central Valley, and there's a whole story to be told about, African Americans in the Central Valley. That's one of the things that I said I'm going to write that book when I retire, but not right away. Okay. And so my mother also is a native Californian, which is actually fairly rare to go back a couple of generations as a native Californian. My father's people were from Oklahoma, but he came as a baby, about 2 years old. So they spent all of their formative years in California and the Central Valley and grew up there. I still have quite a bit of family actually there as well.
Right. Well, that whole philosophy of y'all come is just everywhere. I guess it's ingrained in the culture.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that, folks from Southern states, African American people from Southern states, think are unique to them. Well, my parents will tell you they picked cotton in Bakersfield as young adults. My family had a family farm. My grandfather was a blacksmith. Had his own business, and I grew up my uncle had pigs and chickens. We shelled black-eyed peas, all of the things that people talk about they did in the South. We did all of those things right there in rural California. That's why I say I have to tell the story of the African Americans in rural California, because there's a lot that is parallels to the experiences of the South as well.
Well, you have everything but the Southern accent. Now, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Based on your background and your history, we learned who Robin Carter is growing up and the influences there. So you ended up as the dean of a college, but as an educator, I guess would be the big word. So did that career choose you, or did you choose it?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. As I stated, I was a social worker and I was happy with what I was doing. And the latter years of my career as a social worker, I moved into healthcare social work. So I worked with people who were the chronically ill. I worked in hospice with people who were dying. And I loved the work. I really felt it was rewarding work. It is not until I answered an ad to teach a course in gerontology, which is another area was an area that I worked in, that my entree into the classroom really was it for me. I didn't know that I would love teaching as much as I did. And it is just being in a stimulating environment, being around people who were growing and learning. And it was actually a nice transition for me, because as much as I loved boots on the ground, as I called, frontline social work, it excited me. There is some point in your career you have to move away from that real intense work. So really moving into actually teaching and taking a step back and really preparing the next generations of social workers was a really good place for me to land. So that really was, I would say, it shows me, once I actually started doing teaching, then I kind of a light bulb went off for me. So when the opportunity came to actually apply for a full-time position, I did that, and was fortunate, and I was able to secure that position. That began my career in academia.
All right. So practitioner, teacher, educator, and then to administrator.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Right. So those are the steps that would be logical. And I think the most important thing is you have that academic background, but having the experience probably made you a better teacher, I would think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I would say, one of the things that, so much with what I learned about, through my social work education, I have a bachelor's degree as well as a master's degree in social work, was about relationship and human behavior and how to relate to people and how to problem solve, on a one-to-one personal level, institutional, as well as macro level. Those are the things that really the foundation that I brought into my work as an academic. So, and it was fundamental to my success throughout my career, those early kind of teachings and those early ways in which I learned to be successful in my job as a social worker.
Now, again, the name of my show is Work Relationships Matter. And so you definitely hit on the high point for me. Let's unpack that a little bit more about how you develop those relationships, one-on-one, large group, as you go through with people. They're always, I say people are messy. They have different, sometimes conflicting motivations and things like that, but keeping them on track is sometimes not the easiest thing in the world. So help our listeners understand how you handled those relationships and how you built those strong relationships.
Well, I think, some of it, again, is the micro level skills that I learned and was able to hone during my time as a social work, which is, active listening, paying attention, holding everyone in high regard, and which means, having and displaying equity. I would think that if, anyone who's ever worked with me would always say that I was fair and I was equitable in my decision making, that I listened to people, I allowed them to be heard. I did not, prejudge people or put them in a category. I had, success throughout my career in working with some people who'd been deemed early on in their careers as the difficult or the challenging people. Not to say that was always easy. There were certainly people who challenged me and situations that challenged me as well. But I never stopped trying. And I one of the things that I would, say to the people who I managed and who I mentored as well, is that you, especially as an administrator, don't get the option of writing someone off. That is never an opportunity. You must continue to try. It is you as the leader who sets the tone and the mood. And if in fact people see that you are trying and that you are willing to put every effort into it, you can make a lot of inroads, even with people. And even when I talk about the challenging people, a lot of times these are people who have been hurt, or if they've been pushed aside, or if they're bringing their own, kind of internal things that are going on with them into the workplace. And you got to acknowledge that people don't show up to work just, as a clean slate when they walk through the door. They might be dealing with a myriad of difficulties and past traumas that they're bringing to work with them. And you've got to know that and acknowledge that and deal with that as well.
Yeah, active listening, that's a lot more difficult than I think most people realize, because what you're talking about is hearing what is said and feeling what is not said.
Mhm. Mhm.
Taking the time to listen, and I guess it's empathy would be a word that I would use that would describe that leadership style,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Absolutely. As you've been an administrator in higher ed. One of the things that we get to do as administrators, we get to develop programs, we get to secure funds, we get to start things, we know sometimes we're the givers of good news and good things, but also the other side of that is we are the people that a lot of times have to deliver bad news, and we have to take things away, and we have to sometimes say no, very often, more often than we want to. And if you have taken the time to really build those relationships, build solid, trusting relationships, even when you have to deliver that bad news or take something away or say no during times of budget retrenchment, or someone doesn't get the promotion or the job that they want, or they have a great idea that isn't really feasible given the resources and the opportunities we have available to us. It makes it a whole lot easier if people already have a sense of trust. They believe that you, again, are fair and equitable, that you treat people, that you don't have favorites, that you don't treat people a certain way, that you're not making decisions that aren't based on the real evidence and the objectionable evidence that's in front of you. And I just found that has just worked for me, even though even delivering the most difficult news, it has worked for me.
Right. And I know that's not always easy because you don't have control over things, but you've got to be the messenger. And sometimes the messenger doesn't always get treated as well as they should.
Right.
So, given that, what is the toughest situation you faced and how did you handle it?
I would say the toughest situation actually I faced was as a department chair. So kind of, moving from a faculty member into administration, I had a number of roles. I was graduate coordinator, I was admissions coordinator, those things that didn't take me completely out of the classroom. It wasn't until I became department chair that I was actually, even though that's not considered administrator, you're quasi administrator, which means you have the responsibility for your unit, for a whole department, and but you don't have all of the authority that goes with an administrator. So it's a quasi. So in that position in particular, I would say, and I tell people it's probably one of the most difficult, semi-administrative positions on campus, but it's the best way to learn, simply
Mm.
because you have to rely on your ability to influence others without the real authority. So in the most difficult situation, and I had a faculty member there who had challenges with previous department chairs. And she was an extremely bright woman, had a lot to offer, just a very rich background. But at the same time, she had some very clear ideas about her expectations and what she wanted to see done and how she wanted to see done in terms of the department. We were very democratic in our way of running things. I had, lots of committees, lots of folks who I wasn't the central decision maker. There were lots of ways where faculty and staff as well, and decision process. But this particular person seemed to have challenges with all folks in kind of all of those areas. And I think the most difficult part of it is that she was also, when she zeroed in on someone, and it was usually the person who had the most authority, and that it was a department chair. She also wanted she made things very public. So there were very public pronouncements and tendencies to make a lots of not declarative statements, sending out over email to lots of people, many times with, some factual, but a lot of things that weren't factual. And And so what I learned through that is, first of all, what I said earlier is you don't have the option of giving up on anybody. Okay. You could also always look at kind of disciplinary measures, but many times it's really not appropriate. The person really isn't doing anything that you could necessarily discipline, but they're also acting outside of the norm or expectations of the group. So part of what I had to do with that person is continue in relationship with them, but also really work to strengthen the rest of the group in ways that, because other people were concerned, other people felt as though they were victimized by this person in concern, and really work hard to really strengthen that group. So eventually what happened, and I had to a lot of times, not respond, or choose to respond in a way that, didn't inflame or continue the debate. But at the same time, work to and listen to see if there were actually things there that needed to be responded to. And eventually the group, I would say the faculty, the students, and the staff were the ones who made an impact on this person. So they were the ones to say, this is our community. And this is something that I really built. We are community. And as a community, everyone counts, everyone matters. But if someone in the community is hurting others or making them feel in some way invaluable or pushing them out, then the community needs to respond. And eventually the community responded in a way that really shut that person down, did not allow their words and their actions to have the kind of influence they wanted to have. And once they realized that that was what was happening, it really changed their behavior. And I would say that was really the most impactful kind of challenge that I had. I've had many others. I could talk about, our response to the pandemic, which lots of things happening. But I would say in terms of a learning experience for me, it helped me to, what I've already known is, when you're a leader, you're leading the community for folks, and the community has to be brought into and fulfilling their purpose, which is to act as a community and establishing and holding to the community norms and expectations.
And that is very important. I think that a lot of people want to be in leadership positions, but weary is the head that carries the crown. Because with that, the accolades of being a leader, there's also that balancing act you have to do with dealing with a variety of people. And I think that our listeners who are moving up into leadership positions, when I hear what you're saying, it's like this was a long-term process. And you had to, I guess you were still open, but you couldn't take things personally or get defensive about it. You had to work through it day in and day out. How did that stress affect you?
Well, I think, you made a really important statement, is not taking it personally. I think, again, early on, I took it personally. And because, again, it was directed at me and it felt like personal attacks. And so it's hard not to get defensive and feel the need to defend yourself when you're facing personal attacks, especially when someone's sending them out in the ether to everybody. And what I was able to really hang on to, and again, because I developed relationships and I would consult with others, is that, when someone puts things out there about you that aren't true, they won't resonate with others. So what I came to realize is that even though she was making a lot of, declarative statements about me, others weren't impacted by those at all. There wasn't, I didn't need to defend myself because people already knew me and they knew my work and they knew how I treated people. And they would find it, people just found that there's something inconsistent here. We know how Robin has treated others. We see how she behaves in this environment, and why would she treat this person differently? There's just no history of that. It just doesn't resonate. And so I think that was really important, having built that foundation over time where people knew me. They knew me, they knew my work, they knew how I worked with people, and it just wasn't consistent with the way I did things.
And what it sounds like is that the reason they knew you is because you got out of your office and got to know the people one on one, kind of like what you were talking about before early on in your career when you did one on one work versus group work. Is that true that by getting to know them personally, that kind of helped them really know who you were? And so when things came out, they know we know who this person is,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
know that's not what they do.
Yes, yes, yeah. That really means paying attention to someone who, again, who's dealing with personal struggles. So, someone who's a caregiver for their sick mother, or someone
Mhm.
who's lost a child, or someone who's going through a bitter divorce. Again, those might be, there's so many things that people tell you privately about their lives that you keep confidential, but you know about it and you know the impact that it has on their lives, and you show empathy and support for them around those kinds of things. The other thing too is really helping to, and again, what I think that people will say about me is I help people develop and mentor them in their careers. And that particularly as a woman of color, as an African American woman who really was I really wanted to see those folks who needed a little helping hand, just like I did at the beginning of my career. I was new to academia. It was a whole nother monster for me. And there were people, informal mentors, who helped me along the way, showed me the ropes, stood in the gaps for me, ran interference for me in so many ways. I needed to be that person because people did that for me. So that again builds a sense of support and a sense of loyalty when people know that you will be there for them, in ways beyond just the ways that they expect. That means, through the retention tenure process for faculty members who were struggling, helping them to find additional ways they can do that. I was particularly supportive of staff. When
Mhm.
I started in my position as a department chair, I would say 90% of the staff were African American and Latino women, and
Mhm.
many were single parents. They had their own things that they kind of were dealing with. And I was really always supportive of staff. That meant sometimes having to go up against faculty. But that
Mhm.
really meant that, these are the people who were doing the ground level work that made it possible for us to do the work that we were doing. So they needed to be protected. They needed to be supported. They needed to be encouraged. And that meant for me, and I've always held this, is that if there I had people working with me who are doing an exceptional job, and I
Right.
see in them the potential to move forward in their careers, it's incumbent on me to help them do that, even if it means they'll move away from me and that I will no longer have them anymore. I think success means helping people move up and move on beyond what it is they're doing with you, and having a part of that is really important.
Excellent, excellent. So that leads me right into my next point. What was most rewarding? What project or that you did that you're most proud of?
I would say, anything that had to do with mentoring and supporting, was really important to me. I would say, if I can just give one, and there are actually many, the one that really stands out to me is I developed a support program for faculty, particularly early faculty. And this was really important because, again, we were really emphasizing bringing in more women, more faculty of color. And what we know in the institution is that bringing them in is one thing, but getting them to stay, because they need a certain amount of mentoring and support along the way. We hadn't always been successful with that. And so one of the things that I did early on as a even an associate dean, and emphasize it more as a dean, was found funds that allowed more faculty professional development. For a long time, and even through my career, the expectation is that you attend conferences, you present at conferences, you publish, you do all of these kinds of things, with, for the most part, faculty salaries are relatively low, but you had to do this off your back. So there really wasn't a lot of support in the institution to do the things that you required to do in order to move up and get tenure and move on. So I developed a program and really put some resources into it. And we saw a significant change in the way that people were able to build their resources. And again, it wasn't just about supporting an individual. When we supported people around faculty professional development, they got additional training. They were better in the classroom. That professional development also meant that we put resources into them getting more training about how to be more equitable in the classroom, how to work more in areas of student success. We developed those areas. It wasn't just about their research and their publications, although those are really important. It was all the ways that faculty members who were central to making this whole experience for student success, they could be better at what they do, so they then can have more impact and more influences on the students. So I would say we developed a very successful faculty mentoring and faculty professional development program that had a huge impact to bring people in and make them better at what they do.
Right, and so I feel the passion that you have for that. Now, Robin, is there anything that you wanted to share with our listeners that I did not ask you? And you say, I really think they need to know this. What would that be?
I would say, I thought a lot about, when you first approached me and we talked about, sharing kind of, what has made me successful. And I thought about it in, maybe this is just coming from the standpoint of an academic, but I thought about, how do you define success? What does that look like? I mean, one of the things that, I'm really passionate about is mentoring. I've mentored a whole lot of folks throughout my career, and I continue to do that. I would say it's the thing that has kept me there more than anything else, being able to have the opportunity to pass on to people what I've learned. But one of the things that I really focus on is, especially early career folks, is define success for yourself and don't let it be externally defined. And that so many times people early on in their careers, they get their degrees and they're ready to go and they think success is title, they think it's money, they think it's position, and it can be, but that could change throughout our career. But also that might be an externally kind of, way that we've put success on ourselves that doesn't really fit with who we are. And I certainly learned along the way, and I want to pass on to people that they don't have to learn later in life that I did, is success has to do a whole lot with being valued, being respected, being in a place where you feel comfortable, where you feel supported. And that may not always translate into dollars, may not always translate into a title. Now, again, because I mentor mostly women, I say, always fight for the things that are really important to you, and don't settle for less salary. Don't settle for, get the title, the position, those kind of things that are really important to you. But also don't forget that you need to work in an environment where you feel valued, where you feel respected. And those are really indicators of success as well.
That's great information. And again, as I told our listeners, we knew that they would benefit from everything that you had to say. Thank you so much, Robin, for being my guest on Work Relationships Matter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, if people wanted to learn more about your career, how would they contact you? Is that something that you'd want people to follow up with you on?
That's fine. I am still, at this point, I am still using my Sac State. I'm an emeritus faculty, so I'm still using my Sac State email address. So that is available. It's okay for you to pass that on to people.
Okay. All right. Now, do you mind just staying it on there? Because some of these are audio, some are video. So do you want to share that right now? Are you comfortable doing that?
Yes. My email address is carterr@csus.edu.
All right. Well, great. And so, Robin, I appreciate that. And Folks, this has been a wonderful experience. We've learned so much and hopefully you've gained a lot from this interview. Again, you're listening to WRM Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, the Edward Jones. And one thing I'd like our listeners to do, and maybe you too, Robin, is to go to my website, www.prodestinycoaching.com. There is a quiz that I have, a survey about work relationships. And fill that out. I'll take a look at it, and I might even draw up a paper on that. But it's www.prodestinycoaching.com. Hope you'll be able to do that. So signing off for now, thank you all for listening, and thank you especially, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we're out.